Hey people. So I've been going through a lot of the old Friends episodes. I have almost a whole collection on old videotapes. My younger sister had the entire collection on DVD, but she's not here at the moment. Anyway, I've been going through a lot of the old episodes. Some of them I'm very familiar with. Um, I want to talk a little bit about Friends versus Seinfeld because to finish off a little piece of dinner that I had. Yeah. Okay, Friends versus Seinfeld. This is something that often comes up on internet forums, and it seems to provoke quite passionate debate. Um, from the outset, I'm going to say I'm coming from this from a perspective of a Friends fan. Okay, so I'm not going to hide that fact. But this is not coming from a point of animosity towards Seinfeld as a show. It's simply because I am really not familiar with Seinfeld. In fact, literally everything I know about Seinfeld is over the past week. Friends, on the other hand, I virtually grew up with. I'm 31 now. I've been watching Friends since I was 12. Okay, so that just gives some context. I barely know Seinfeld. So in this video, I'm going to be talking more about why I believe Friends was such a strong show, as opposed to critique of Seinfeld. Because it wouldn't be fair for me to talk at great length about Seinfeld when I don't know a great deal about it. Of course, something like this is going to be very subjective because if you grew up with Seinfeld, you're going to go for Seinfeld. If you grew up with Friends, you're going to go for Friends. Um, but basically, little bit of background about both shows. Seinfeld is older. It was launched in 1989, ran for 9 seasons until 1998. Friends was launched in September 1994, running until 2004. So they were roughly the same running time, Friends slightly longer. Both set in New York City, and yet both filmed in Los Angeles, and both about a group of friends. But the concept was quite different. With Seinfeld, as I understand it, it was self-described as a show about nothing. So you had the leading character, Jerry Seinfeld, and three friends, and yet, according to the synopsis on Wikipedia, they weren't linked by anything other than friendship. So they weren't work colleagues, they didn't go to college together or anything like that. And incidentally, I know there will be Seinfeld fans probably and driving them crazy with this video, as they are really familiar with it, and I'm not. With Friends, it launched later. Many people would say on top of Seinfeld. Many people would say it borrowed some ideas. But with Friends, there were connections. Ross and Monica were siblings. Chandler went to high school with Ross. Um, Rachel was Ross's high school crush. In a sense, the outsiders were Phoebe and Joey. Joey, I believe, was a flatmate of Chandler when the series began. But if you're a Friends fan, its its influence is massive. I think both. It's fair to say that both shows were very successful at different times. There will be people who say that Seinfeld ranks higher in the Nielsen rating system. The point I would contend is that Friends had an international appeal that, as far as I know, Seinfeld never had. I mean, if you look in the UK, Friends is massively popular here. Mention Seinfeld, people will probably have to look it up. Um, if you go to Germany, everyone knows Friends. If you even go to China, which is a completely different culture, other side of the world, there's many of my students recognize the show, even though it's been over for 12, 13 years. Now, to me, that is influential. That people of a younger generation in another country can recognize this show says something. I very much doubt the same can be said of Seinfeld. Now, within America, it might be a different situation. It might be that Seinfeld was much bigger. I also want to talk about the actual character development. The premise of a show being about nothing. Apparently, it was obviously successful because it ran for 9 series. And I really don't want to bash Seinfeld because, I could end up watching loads of clips and end up really liking it. So I don't want to bash it. But Sometimes I see comments from Seinfeld fans saying Friends was a lot of rubbish and it's crap, etc. I strongly disagree. I think Friends had something for everyone. I think Friends had character development. Um, and okay, it may have been formulaic in the sense that it may have given the premise for all the shows. And when you get down to it, the basis of Friends is pretty simple. Six friends living together in a New York City apartment. Now, there is some flaws in Friends. One of the main critiques is how could a group of young people in their 20s afford such a decent apartment in the middle of Manhattan? Um, there's some other flaws in terms of the storylines, like there was some mistakes, for example, about Ross's birthday, that sort of thing. But for me, Friends really had an influence on the 1990s in a way that I think surpassed Seinfeld simply because of that international thing. You know, you mention Friends around the world, people know what it's about. I think Seinfeld really was only really known in the United States, possibly, I don't know about broadcasting in Canada or Mexico, but that's why I believe Friends was a more influential show on the surface. Okay, like I say, I could end up watching Seinfeld clips. I've watched so far about 10 clips, and some of it's quite funny. So far, I'm not really kind of getting into it. I just don't see the big appeal. But like I say, it wouldn't be fair to kind of base my feelings on 1 week of watching clips of Seinfeld versus 20 years of watching Friends. So obviously, I'm biased. I'm admitting that I'm absolutely biased. If I'd watched both shows, I'd be in a much better position to compare and contrast. But I would just put that point that Friends definitely had a more international appeal than Seinfeld. Also, I get the impression maybe Seinfeld was sometimes too smart for its own good. I think it was relying a lot on quite in-depth wit, and that's good. But I think Friends sometimes it's attacked for having very basic humor, but actually, so what? Um, I mean, I think one thing I liked about Friends is it's a 1990s show, but it had an almost old-fashioned thing about it. What I mean by that was it was very quite innocent. It's not to say that the humor was always tame, it was sometimes risky. And one thing I liked about Friends was it was very politically incorrect. Um, and yet it was never ultra controversial. I think Friends just got the balance right. I mean, I don't have it right now, but I actually have a mug with the Central Perk logo on it. I've never seen that sort of merchandise for Seinfeld. Um, Friends posters. I've never even seen a poster for Seinfeld. So, on face value, I would say Friends had a much bigger influence. Seinfeld might actually be the smarter of the two shows. I'll give it that, but smarter doesn't necessarily mean better. In the end of the day, it's about appeal, and I think if you were to just take it at face value, Friends had a bigger influence simply because there's Friends references in Family Guy, in numerous other comedies. I'm not sure if there's that many Seinfeld references. So yeah, that's it summed up basically. I think Friends had a more international appeal. I think Seinfeld was smart, but probably too smart for its own good sometimes. And the premise, it's just hard to sell the idea of a show about nothing, as opposed to a show about six friends living together and having character development. For me, that sells better. So this is entirely opinionated. It's entirely subjective. Um, but let me know your thoughts. If you're a Seinfeld fan, sell it to me. What's great about Seinfeld? Um, that's more practical than just saying, "Oh, Friends is rubbish." So instead of convincing me why Friends is rubbish, because you won't convince me, I think Friends is a great show. Convince me why Seinfeld is so good. Okay? Because I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying I don't know it. So pretend that I'm an alien. I've come down to Earth and I want to see a sitcom about life on Earth, life in New York City. Sell Seinfeld to me. Tell me why it's so good. And by all means, criticize Friends, but I'm not going to agree because I happen to believe Friends was a great show. Incidentally, on the subject of Friends, some people say there's an internet forum asking who is the sixth friend. Sorry, who is the seventh friend? That's a good question. Some would say Gunther, who of course is the owner of Central Perk. Some would say Ross and Monica's parents. They had some very funny lines and they were in a lot of shows. Some would say Emily, the British girl, but she was annoying for a lot of people. Some would say Janice, Chandler's girlfriend, again, very annoying. So that's an interesting question. If you're a Friends fan, who do you think is the seventh friend? And another interesting thing about Friends, and this is worth mentioning. In fact, I didn't mention this before. With Friends, someone has actually spent a lot of time looking at the script for every single episode and seeing how it's allocated between the friends. And it was worked out that Joey has the most airtime, and I forget which friend had the least airtime, but the ratio, I think it was Phoebe actually, but the ratio of most airtime versus least airtime, I think they worked out that Joey had 49% of airtime out of all the episodes. Phoebe had 47%. So the difference was very narrow. Now with Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld dominates the show. So in that sense, it's much more of a one-man show, and for me, that's not quite as interesting than six different people who all have their episodes, all have their moments. But again, that's entirely subjective. So if you're a Seinfeld fan, let me know why it's so great, and if you're a Friends fan, who do you think is the seventh friend? So let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.